We're getting there.
YouTube.
We're almost there with our slow. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Don't want that. Back here. Okay. We are now fully live and ready. Thank you.
Okay, do it again. City of Fairview Planning Commission, Tuesday, August 25th, 6:32. Can I get a roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Dew.
Here.
Commissioner Mondaro.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Hooper.
Here.
Commissioner Pearson.
Here.
Commissioner Walters.
Here.
And Chair Holcomb.
Present.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
All right, do we have any citizens wishing to speak on non-agenda items?
We do not.
Okay. Adoption of minutes from July 28th, 2026. Did everyone get a chance to read the minutes? Yes. Any corrections?
No.
Comments?
I move that we accept the minutes as written for the Tuesday, July 28th Planning Commission meeting.
I say. Double.
All right, well, we have a motion and a couple of seconds to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. Work session, state housing legislation and rulemaking update.
Okay. Well, we have invited Sean Edging, come on up, Sean, from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to join us this evening. I'll get your the presentation queued up here. To give the commission an update and some information about the work that the state has been doing to help promote housing production. We are going to be getting into a set of code maintenance amendments and responding to new housing laws. This is kind of one of the buckets that we'll be looking at in terms of the code amendments that we need to make. So I think this is a great opportunity to kind of get a refresher on the big picture, as well as to ask any questions from Sean, who has more expertise on the topic of state housing rule than anybody else in the room, I think. So thanks for being here, Sean. And let me get the presentation just ready to go here.
Welcome to Mayberry.
Thank you.
All right, and if there's any other introduction that you want to make about yourself and your role, yeah, you could do that too.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to meet everybody. My name is Sean Edging. I am a housing planner at the Housing Accountability and Production Office. We're an office that exists within both DLCD, the Building Codes Division. I'll talk more about that when we get into the presentation. But yeah, Sarah asked me to provide kind of an overview of some of the housing laws that I know you guys have been grappling with as commission members. And I know also there's going to be, we'll talk to this a little bit in the presentation. Part of my suggestion was actually to also have another person come out from DLCD who specializes maybe more in the long range stuff. I'll explain more about that when we get into the presentation, but we'll give you a slice of some of the work that we do here at HAPO to help support the production of housing and help local governments have the tools and resources that they need to effectively implement Oregon's housing laws. I did expect Kelly would join us. I think she had just a last minute thing come up, so she won't be joining us. So apologies about that on the slide there. But if we could move to the next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, I can also just use the clicker too, if that is helpful.
Yeah.
Does it work?
It's been a little temperamental.
You'd have to just scroll.
You might have to
Using
just
it's
do this.
I think.
It's one of these things.
Oh,
I know, we'll get, I
we
think.
do not want to summarize with Copilot.
No,
Not this time.
we don't. Okay, here we
Oh,
go.
great.
Now it's working.
Okay.
Sometimes it just takes a little click.
Perfect. And I'll see, I can.
Yeah, you
so I
can
don't have
take
to
it from
ask you
there.
every time.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I divided this presentation into 3 parts. I'm going to start with just kind of like really high level, like a little bit of kind of like a, like overview of kind of land use law in the state of Oregon, that type of thing. Not a super in-depth one, but just kind of a refresher on some of the kind of structures and like who decision makers are and who implementers are at different levels of government for housing laws. We'll spend the bulk of our presentation focusing on some of the more recent housing laws that the legislature's passed in the past couple of years to, facilitate the production of housing and kind of what that means in brief. I know, I understand all of y'all will have a lot of questions about those laws. I'm happy to kind of speak to those to the best of my ability, and provide clarity where that exists in the law. And I obviously point out where there might not be clarity that exists in the law too. That's also part of it. And then the kind of last part of the presentation is really around what tools we provide to kind of aid local governments. That includes the city of Fairview. I know Sarah and I, we've talked about a couple of these tools in the past to really help local governments have the resources that they need to effectively implement. So we'll kind of spend the last part of our presentation going over that. But I guess before moving on, should I pause? I guess I'll pause for questions as we get into the housing law section. Once we, like go over each law, I'm sure you folks will have a lot of questions for each of those. So I'll do that, but I'll just kind of get started right now with the high level overview. The broad statewide picture. Oh, no. Sorry. Oh, man.
Try it again.
There we
Okay.
go.
I feel like there's something with needing to like click on the screen
Click
to
on the screen.
initiate.
All right.
Okay,
I think I can do both.
yeah, and maybe it's just a one-time thing after I mess
Hopefully.
something up. Yeah.
All right.
It says here in small print.
Yeah, right. So, and I know this is going to be like a little bit civics 101. I know like a lot of you guys already know a lot of this stuff, but I just wanted to give kind of a zoomed out, like 10,000 foot picture of, when we think about state housing laws. I think it's common for people to think of the state as one thing. It's actually a lot of different groups of people, all with different motivations working together in kind of similar-ish directions. So I wanted to give just kind of a brief overview of some of that structure of like how Oregon land use law is structured and like how especially housing laws are implemented, and just give kind of a broad picture there. And really everything that we're going to be talking about, all the different policies, all the different laws that we're talking about originate from one source, that is the Oregon legislature, right? Obviously, basic civics, we have a legislative branch, we have an executive branch. The legislative branch is the branch that decides kind of what the policy direction is, what we ought to do with regard to, housing and housing production. And really, once those bills are passed and then they're signed, then it goes then to the executive branch to support implementation. And that's where I live. There's kind of 2 main entities I wanted to talk about that really touch on land use specifically. There is on the right there, the Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC. You can think of them almost like a kind of statewide planning commission. They are responsible for the effective implementation of state land use laws, and that includes obviously all the housing laws that we're talking about, and of course just Oregon's broader statewide planning goals and statewide planning, land use planning framework. They take laws that the Oregon legislature adopts and directs them to implement, and they kind of go into the weeds and develop all of the kind of specific policies on how you effectively implement those laws that are passed by the legislature. And they do that through what are called Oregon administrative rules, which I sometimes characterize as like nerdy laws. So if the legislature sets the big broad policy direction, administrative rules really get into the nitty gritty around, what are the parameters, what are the specific things that go into how this law is implemented on the ground. And then on the other side of the graph here with the executive branch, we have the Department of Land Conservation and Development. That's the agency that I work for. And really our agency, we are staffed by land use professionals whose job is really to provide technical assistance, to provide resources to all of our different implementation partners, including local governments, housing producers, X, Y, and Z, to really support effective implementation. And there's kind of 2 main entities that are both actually fairly new at DLCD that focus on housing implementation. One side of it, and the reason why I recommend a second presentation, is we have our colleagues in the housing division who I know folks on this commission have talked a lot about the broad picture, like what are Fairview's needs? We talked about like what are Fairview's housing production numbers, things like that. And what are the policies that Fairview is going to undertake to meet need in the long term? That's a process that we call Goal 10. It's kind of the statewide process of planning for need and planning to take actions to support those needs. And my colleagues in the housing division help support and implement that. And HAPO doesn't focus on that. So I just wanted to make clear right at the top here, if we're going to be talking about some things, there's going to be some topics where I'm like, oh, that's really kind of a housing division topic. So I really encourage kind of bringing them back. There are a lot of the folks that lead a lot of these policy conversations. They do a lot of rulemaking. Of course, they can speak to a lot of these topics better than I can. But on the other side, Housing Accountability and Production Office, where I work, we could be thought of as more of like the folks who focus on the near-term side of things. So focus a lot on development and how development intersects with a lot of the different laws that the legislature has passed to support production. I'll talk more about what that means in a forthcoming slide. But before we get there, one of the things I also wanted to emphasize is when a bill gets passed, a law gets passed, it's tempting to think of that as just being the law of the land, but really where implementation happens is at the local level, right? It's cities, it's counties, it's housing producers building the housing that ultimately results in any particular law resulting in anything being built on the ground, right? So a big part of our job is ensuring that all of our implementation folks, cities, counties, housing producers, have what they need to do that effectively. So I'll move on to the next slide. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that high-level civics look. No? Okay. Great. So what is HAPO? That's the organization that I work for. We're a fairly new office, actually. We're just 1 year old as of this last July. We were established by a bill in the 2024 session called Senate Bill 1537. And we are a joint office between the Department of Land Conservation and Development, the agency I work for, as well as the Building Codes Division at the Department of Consumer and Business Services. And really our job is to help support and boost housing production in partnership with our housing producers and local governments through the effective implementation of Oregon's housing laws. And of course, through navigating different state agencies and processes as well. I'll talk a little bit about some of those kind of. Obviously, I'm not going to be talking about building codes today. I'm not a building codes expert. Of course, we can always reach out to folks on our building codes team. We work very closely with them on kind of our broader mandate to support production in the state. There's a couple of main tasks that we do, or a couple of main things that the bill that created us directs us to do. I kind of summarize them in these three pieces. The first part is around ensuring that, all of the different housing laws that the legislature has passed to help support the production of housing are effectively implemented. That's one of our kind of primary goals and purposes. One of the second things that we do, and this one's kind of more of a resource question, we provide a lot of technical assistance and guidance to local governments to ensure that they know, right, how do we actually implement these things effectively. And then finally, we kind of have a broader role in information gathering, research, guidance to help address barriers to production. This includes actually a wide range of things, from studies that we're directed to do, also to navigating different kind of other state agencies that touch on the housing development project or process, sorry. So if there's, say, a project that has to deal with, say, DEQ permitting or wastewater treatment, and those processes can sometimes be challenging to navigate, a big role that we also provide, or service that we provide, is helping folks understand what are those programs, what are the requirements that go into them, and how can we help address, basically solve problems. So that's more or less kind of just in short what our office does. Now in today's presentation, I'm going to be focusing on just really all the housing law questions that, I know all of you all have been grappling with today. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I won't be talking about some of these other aspects, but, hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of the tools too. All right, well, I think with that, that's enough about us. We can kind of dive into the housing law side of it. I guess I'll just pause really quickly to see if anybody has any questions about my office or what I do on a day-to-day.
A question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How many people are in your
We're
department?
a mighty team of 7.
Team of 7.
Yeah, that includes our management and admin too.
So how much of your time is actually spent in the field working individually with cities like ours?
Oh, very, very frequently. So yeah, most of our work is around a combination of administering like funds and communicating with local governments around like, code work that they need to do, Oftentimes I'm reading and reviewing local development codes, connecting with folks in the field, doing presentations like this with folks in the field. Also, we connect more with housing producers too, to see like, all right, is there a development project? How can we help, kind of support, maybe a barrier you might be facing, maybe there's a DEQ problem, things like that. Most of my work is spent connecting with directly and like helping solve problems more or less with local governments and housing producers.
I'd say it probably keeps you 7 people very busy.
It does. Yes, it does. Yeah.
And I'll say before HAPA was created, if you recall, when the city did a big code update to comply with the middle housing rules. So we had this big package of code amendments. Sean was a staff person who reviewed it and commented and made sure that all of our proposed amendments complied with state law, highlighted other things that we need to think about in the future. So when he talks about reviewing codes for cities, we have direct experience with that.
Sweet.
So you find since the inception of your department that things have been able to move more streamlined and
That's a very nuanced question. Yeah, I think the main thing is where our office kind of has been able to help a lot is sometimes there can just be problems that are like knots that are created that can be solved if there was kind of a third party that could basically get involved and see like, all right, where are people at in terms of like why this problem seems to be kind of impassable, and us providing kind of a means or an off-ramp to kind of enable the project to move forward. And that's where I think we've been most effective in a lot of our work. So when we see, say, a development project, we often work with both the local government and, say, a housing producer. And if there's a issue that touches on a housing law, where we've been most effective is when we can kind of find that off-ramp that kind of both parties can live with. Yeah.
super, thank you.
Yeah.
Wondering, do you have like a region of the state that you focus on? Do you have
So our 7-person team is statewide, but we also, as part of DLCD has regional representatives. That's who Kelly Reed is, and that's why I invited her to come out here today. She's kind of the ears on the ground for specifically the East Metro region.
Okay.
We split Metro into 2. That's
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, for all the work that we do at DLCD, our reps are kind of our conduit or our ears on the ground to what's going on in community and to give us a better insight on what's happening.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I think we can go to the next one.
Great, yeah, and so with this one, I expect we're going to spend the most time here. I put together kind of a series of slides on maybe some of our most common, recent housing laws that the legislature's passed that I think are worth being aware of in kind of a brief format. Obviously, with all of these are very in-depth topics that they're sprawling. It's very much like reading the arcane texts whenever you open Oregon revised statute. So, I definitely encourage kind of pausing for questions, things like that as we get into this. But I'll just move us along. So I mentioned previously, and don't worry about reading anything on the slide. This is just to kind of showcase that the legislature, right? They are the primary policy body that decides, right, what is our overall statewide framework on, basically encouraging housing production in the state. Every year, they get together in either a short or a long session. They consider bills that include just different concepts that, consider how we allow housing or how we can facilitate more of it. And they pass, every year they pass different bills that then kind of go into implementation. This is just a list of some of the laws that we've kind of administered, both on the land use side that I administer, as well as our colleagues on the building code side. But I'll actually talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of these. And I didn't put them in any particular order, but I'll start with the temporary ones. So one of the laws that have been passed in both 2024 and 2025 are actually temporary provisions that are designed to kind of, in the near term, kind of reduce some of the kind of near-term barriers that can be inhibiting production projects. There's kind of 2 main ones to be aware of. One is in Senate Bill 1537 that is a requirement for what we call housing land use adjustments. So every local government, they have their own development codes with all different types of regulations for the siting and design of housing. What this law requires is for kind of a subset of qualifying housing developments that meet kind of certain requirements There are specific flexibilities that are outlined in the statute that a project can be eligible to receive in, say, like if they're trying to move forward and there's a barrier related to, say, I don't know, setbacks, right? The policy would enable them to be eligible to kind of request a flexibility to that standard. And this policy is something that's going to be in place until, I believe, 2032 is when it expires. And actually, if you look at this image that's on the screen here, this is actually a project that was facing kind of one of those land use regulations. This is an affordable housing project in the city of Astoria that was able to use this law in order to be able to move forward. They were facing an issue relating to kind of underground parking that was required by the city. And in this case, because this project was able to move forward, it's actually for low-income seniors and people with disabilities. So it's kind of an example of a showcase of one that actually pretty quickly after the bill was passed was able to kind of take advantage of some of these flexibilities. In 2025, the legislature kind of added a new temporary policy through Senate Bill 974, which are specific to what are called residential design standards. These are a subset of design standards that focus on kind of regulating the aesthetic or architectural characteristics of buildings. And what it specifically requires is for certain types of projects that are either 20 or more units and not multifamily, they can be eligible to basically exempt or be exempt from certain kinds of residential design standards. And that is also a temporary policy that sunsets on 2033, I believe. So 1 year after land use adjustments. I guess yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of that Senate Bill 974 and the 20-plus units, do you know if was a particular type of residential development in that category that was facing the most challenges in terms of design standards that kind of led to this?
I don't really know, in part because, when it comes to legislation, we tend not to be in the room.
Right.
Unless we're invited specifically, so we don't follow the conversation of like, what were people intending with this policy? All we have is what was written and entered into the legislative record. There is a letter and a statement of intent. If you look up Senate Bill 974 that speaks to that I believe was submitted by Representative Brees Iverson. But beyond that, I don't actually have clear insight as to like what specific kind of application they were shooting for. What I can say, and we'll talk more about this later, is there have been a lot of questions of like, how do you count to 20? Which is surprisingly difficult of a question to answer. Like, when do you count to 20? Like, what qualifies? That we are trying to clarify a lot more in a model code, which I'll talk about later.
Yeah. And just to add on one more question, multi-unit, how is that defined?
Yeah, so another kind of quirk of the bill, and this one's just a little bit, so the short answer is the definition changed. Originally, when the bill was passed, the definition they used reached for a kind of not super used area of statute that defined it as basically any three or more units that are attached in some way. So they might share a wall, they might share, ceiling floor. And that would basically qualify as multi-unit. And it was for kind of a niche policy that was specific to Portland. But they used it for this particular statute. That obviously has a lot of overlap with middle housing, and that created a lot of ambiguity. So one of the refinements that happened in the following session is they upped that number to 10, which basically removes that overlap with middle housing. So that's just a quirk, is that definition changed.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And just so the Planning Commission knows, we have had interest, and you will likely hear about development in the future that's taking advantage of that Senate Bill 1537 with the adjustments to development and design standards.
Yeah, any questions about this one?
I'm gonna turn the air conditioning back.
Off or on, did you say?
On.
On,
So we get to speak louder again.
yes.
Also, are you guys hearing me okay?
Oh, yes.
By projector? Okay, great.
Well, the acoustics in here are really bad,
Yeah, no.
for people who are hard of hearing.
Yeah.
They end up there somewhere.
You can keep going.
Oh, yeah, of course. All right, well, I'll just move on to the next one. Of course, if questions come up later, it's not too late I'm happy to go back to any of these. I understand this was one of interest, so around land use review and procedure. There were kind of two laws that were passed in recent legislative sessions that kind of really impact how we review housing applications. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I'll start by talking about the clear and objective statute. This one's not new, but it has been expanded in recent years. This is a kind of long-standing requirement that's been applied to housing that requires local governments to apply clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures to the development of housing. Generally, what that means is, you can think about if you have a standard that requires a lot of discretion to know whether a development application meets it or not, say if it is consistent with the character of the neighborhood or things like that. Those take a lot of discretion to apply. So the idea behind clear and objective is that it can be applied independent of mind. It doesn't require the discretion of a reviewer to be able to know whether the standard's met or not. One of the things that happened very recently, actually in 2026, was a bill that was called House Bill 4037, which amended this statute to say, for applications that are subject to this process, which is most of them, there is a pathway where you can do optional discretionary review pathways. I'm sure you probably have reviewed a couple as a planning commission. But for the clear and objective applications, there are new limitations in the procedure that apply to the public notice, that apply to hearings, that apply to appeals of applications that are reviewed under basically the clear and objective pathway. In short, the limitation on public notice is for property owners that are within, generally speaking, a 100-foot radius of the site. That can increase to 500 if there are 20 or more units as part of the development application. There are also limits on the ability of a local government. A local government is prohibited from holding a hearing on the initial decision for the application. And then also in terms of appeals, it limits the appeal rights to the applicant, both for local appeals and for appeals to the Land Use Board of Appeals, which is our state kind of land use adjudicating. I guess they're not really the judicial branch. I actually think they're technically part of the executive, but they're the folks who review appeals. And so that's kind of a new provision that a lot of local governments are starting to kind of codify, and we're actually working on kind of model code to help implement that as well. Something to mention about that, so I mentioned that some applications are reviewed under discretionary standards. There's a pathway where you can have kind of alternative optional discretionary pathways, things like planned unit developments or master plans or sometimes variances, right? There was also a law in 2025 that established kind of administrative procedure requirements for those types of applications, specifically for planned unit developments, for variances, and for certain kinds of zone changes, ones that increase the density of the residential zone. And so there's going to be kind of those additional limitations that kind of come into play from that law as well. I know this one was one that you guys were talking about in the last meeting, so I just wanted to pause and see if folks had any questions about that.
Related to variances or alternative paths, are cities still allowed to have essentially a two-track process where you have a set of clear and objective standards, and if you wish to establish a set of discretionary guidelines, an applicant could follow those instead?
Correct, yeah.
Yes.
The variances are an example of a discretionary pathway. So the law, ORS 197A, section 400, has a subsection that says, in addition to the clear and objective review path, you can have a pathway that is based on standards and criteria that are not clear and objective, provided you meet certain criteria. One of them is that you have to have the option to proceed with a clear and objective pathway. So maybe you don't like the city's development standards, or you can't meet the city's development standards and you need more flexibility. The city can provide an optional discretionary, discretionary pathway where they can consider flexibility to different standards in lieu of that clear and objective pathway. But
Yeah.
it's an optional thing.
And that is not something that Fairview's code has in its structure currently,
I guess the question I
but some
have,
cities do.
is if that's appealable at any point, where I'm disgruntled because Fairview's not giving me what I want, and so can I go to the state at any stage?
That's an important question. We don't really know because the law itself, for clear and objective applications, it limits who may appeal, and it specifically limits it to only the applicant. Now, the question then is like, are there other means of judicial review? For example, things like writ of review. I don't know the answer to that. You'll have to talk to an attorney. But for the optional discretionary things like the planned unit developments or the variances, those are not subject to the same appeal limitations. So third parties could appeal those types of decisions.
And that would follow a path where the planning commission's decision gets appealed up to the council as first step.
But I mean, if the applicant wants to go over our head, just go straight to the state.
Go straight to the state?
Yeah, to appeal,
Oh,
rather than say, I don't want to go through arbitration or whatever, the mitigation.
Like with us, if we make a decision
They don't.
and then they don't like it, they go to the city council, and they skip over the city council and go right to the state.
Basically, that's what I'm,
oh, no, so,
maybe I didn't say that clearly.
yeah, land use procedure is something that local governments set forth in their development code. And, they have to follow both that and of course the law at the same time. And the law allows for local appeals. So, if, say, for example, the city of Fairview has an application process and they want to provide for an appeal pathway, they can set out in their development code saying, all right, if, our staff makes a decision, applicant, you can appeal that to our city council and then they can hear it. And then after they make a decision, of course, then it would go on to wherever in the courts, probably starting with LUBA if it's a land use decision.
So you don't have any adjudication authority, you can help facilitate
You mean,
between parties, but
HAPO is we're not a judicial, we're an executive branch body.
you have no authority to override a city or whatever unless they're in violation of the state code.
Yeah, no, and when we're talking about enforcement, those tools are very different. There's a lot of procedure that goes into them. You have to go to specific decision bodies like LUBA or the Land Conservation and Development Commission. There's a whole process that plays out. That tends to be pretty rare, though. Yeah, HAPO is an executive function. We're just staff folks. Great. Any other questions that folks have just about process?
No, you,
We tend to have a lot of questions after the public hearing portion has been
Okay.
closed.
Oh,
So
yeah.
at the end,
Similar, maybe similar with the presentation. They might come at the end.
Gotcha. Yeah, no worries, no worries. All right, well, let's continue on. This one is kind of a residential homes and facilities. This one's kind of like a long-standing one that was amended pretty recently. But before I talk about it, residential homes and facilities is kind of like an impersonal way of saying things like nursing homes or, assisted living
we
facilities.
have them.
care homes,
Yeah, care homes, or like oftentimes like people with disabilities that like might live in a house where they all like are roommates and they have like a caseworker, things like that. All of these different types, they're like a big bucket of things that are residential in nature, but also involve some aspect of care, residential homes and facilities. For a long time, there's been a law that has protected the siting of residential homes and facilities in residential zones. It's something that's been on the books for a long time, and a lot of cities have implemented it. In 2025, there was a recent bill that kind of expanded a subcategory of it called residential treatment homes and facilities, which are kind of similar but focused on behavioral health. This was part of the behavioral health bill that passed in 2025. And what it did is it established kind of a supersiding requirement that allows it on most lands outside of an urban growth boundary. There's a couple of exceptions for things like heavy industrial and for places that just cannot be served by like public facilities. But that's kind of a new provision that's come about. And that's actually one that we're really leaning on, developing a module that cities can rely on, because these applications are probably going to be very rare. This isn't a very well-known law.
Do you know if, actually got a call on this yesterday.
Okay.
So do you know if old law had a limitation in terms of proximity to other treatment facilities? Or if that's something that was regulated separately through like DHS or OHA and not necessarily originating from law?
Yeah, so on the land use side, so with residential homes and facilities, the idea in residential zones was that you would kind of treat these uses on par with comparable residential uses. So like if you had a, a detached home and you had another thing that was the form of a detached home, but housed like 6 people that are living in a, care home, the two would be kind of regulated similarly to one another. With residential treatment homes and facilities, the land use statute is very limited. It just says these uses, specifically treatment homes and facilities, have to be allowed on most lands, like commercial, residential, industrial, except heavy industrial, a public even. There really aren't that many limitations other than around like infrastructure, if the land's going to be used for a park, if it's heavy industrial, things like that. So there wouldn't be, there's no provision in there that authorizes like having a spacing requirement between any of them.
Yeah.
I should say all of these treatment homes and facilities would be licensed by OHA. So I don't know if they have, different licensing standards that go into that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so the planning commission knows, there's really no land use procedure that we have then for reviewing and approving those types of facilities. We have seen, I would say, a little bit of an uptick, but the only reason we know about it is because there are some, I want to say, fairly new building code requirements related to having sprinklers and meeting other occupancy standards that are requiring some existing buildings with homes or facilities to kind of upgrade things to meet building code requirements. So that is, it seems like one change, at least on the building code side of things.
Sarah, has that been implemented yet? With the
Yes.
city of Fairview?
Yes,
Okay.
on the building code side, yes, we are. And I don't know if there are fully new facilities that are going in, or if some are just going through that process to kind of come into compliance with the new building code requirements.
Is the property owner who is developing a home care or facility required to get a permit from Fairview in order to be able to do that?
They would most likely need a building permit, and they will need a business license.
Okay.
All right, shall we? Okay, let's move on to by right affordable housing. This one's kind of a bundle of laws. I mean, I guess a lot of these have been bundled so far, but this one is focused specifically on affordable housing. So most legislative sessions, there's some kind of concept around making it easier to cite affordable housing. As a consequence, we have like probably about 4 or 5 laws that really get at allowing affordable housing without requiring kind of special review or approval processes. Oftentimes on land that might not be zoned for it, say, for example, on like commercial lands or religious owned lands, sometimes public lands, things like that. And all these laws, they have kind of different parameters around what types of affordable housing qualify to be eligible to be cited under this law. Are there limitations to it? Are there bonuses or like additional flexibilities that might be provided? For example, one of the laws provides density bonuses for qualifying affordable housing development, as well as kind of expedited review timelines, things like that. For all of these, again, we'll talk a little bit more about those model codes. We're kind of developing a big module, kind of implementing a lot of these. But basically, the idea is for subsidized affordable housing that is kind of publicly funded. There's a lot of tools to kind of make it easier to cite it on lands, especially lands that might not be zoned for residential uses.
Do they have a definition of affordable housing?
They have like 6 or 7. Like each law has its own unique like category of what kind of project is eligible to use that law. And there's like, sometimes it's the average of all of the units on the property are affordable to households earning 80% area median income or less. Or sometimes it's all of the units in the property are affordable to households earning 60% area median income or less. Or sometimes it's for manufactured home park cooperatives if they're affordable to households earning.
Okay, they don't know, okay.
There's just a lot. There's just a lot, right? Like, I'm just listing off like a couple in one of the laws. Like, there isn't one definition of affordable housing, is kind of the takeaway, at least from these laws.
Where do they all reside? All these definitions in multiple different places, and you have to,
Yeah, it depends which law you're talking about. So like, if we're talking about the land use laws, they reside in ORS Chapter 197A. If we're talking about, say, like OHCS and their funding programs, that would reside in, I believe it's Chapter 446. I could be wrong about that. It's one of the 400s. But like, they have their own specific definitions of like what projects are eligible for OHCS funding, and that they use and are defined specifically in statute.
Any of your definitions apply to the production of housing
In what way?
when it comes to being able to afford to produce them? In other words, it seems like all your definitions are on the user side, meaning the person that is either renting or possibly buying.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But
Yeah,
in
being,
my world, there is no affordable housing
right.
because it's not affordable. If you had to run my budgets on producing housing, you'd be astounded at how ridiculous they are.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of the laws that we're talking about, so when we're talking about like affordable housing, the reason why they use these definitions is really around like, what are the funding sources that provide for like financing for these different types of housing, right? And so when they're talking about any of these supersiding bills, they're talking about like, all right, we are spending money through things like LIFT or the low-income housing tax credit on these different types of projects. And, you know, the legislature has decided we want to make it easier to permit these in more contexts, and that's where these laws come from. And that's why they have their own kind of specific definitions of like what the legislature intends to be able to use these pathways. When we're talking about market rate housing, some of the laws like, say, for example, the housing land use adjustments, that's a law that's actually designed to reduce the costs that can be associated with development and it's eligible for market rate development too, provided it, you know, they're able to build more housing or things like that. And that is an example of how, you know, some of these laws are actually designed also to provide kind of, you know, basically make it more affordable for developers that are building market rate housing to be able to make a project pencil. And something I work with a lot too in my job is working with developers to see what some of those barriers can be and how we can be a support to address problems that might blow up a project's budget, right? This is something that we do a lot. Do you have a follow-up question?
I don't see, I mean, to be able to produce lots from a development standard, it is not, I don't know, I don't see it as sustainable, but does your agency, do they feel like middle market housing and the type of development that goes into that is a success? Do they feel like that middle market housing has been a success?
Oh, do you mean like middle housing? We'll talk about
Middle housing and middle market housing is.
So the idea, well, yeah, we'll talk about that. I got a future slide on it and I'll kind of speak to some of the outcomes that we're starting to see, because that's a law that's been on the books for about 5 or 6 years so far. But I think more to the point too, at HAPO, we're focused on a broad range of housing from obviously subsidized affordable all the way to even, you know, luxury housing, right? Which is more of a marketing term, but that's inclusive of housing that, you know, involves the creation of new lots too, through things like subdivisions, right? Annexation, things like that.
And there are other projects that the department is working on, I think, to try and get at that question of the cost of producing housing, like having permit-ready plans for building homes. So I think I hear your question, absolutely, in terms of, you know, the cost of construction just keeps going up and up and up. The cost of land keeps going up and up, but the rents that are not necessarily going up, the sales prices are not necessarily going up. So like, how can we, you know, address the affordability issue so that more people are producing housing?
Yeah, I don't think that the public is aware of the cost or the cost of what it takes to produce a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Just a lot, right? Compared to what housing has increased, meaning what you can sell it for versus what you have to produce, the house or the lot, or a combination. Meaning, the sales is much less than what this has increased.
Right.
And this is increased because of a lot of different factors,
Yeah.
a lot of which are jurisdictional costs or state costs through implementations. And middle housing, well, I mean, I won't go into that until you present.
Oh, yeah, sure. And I guess maybe more to the point here is like, I'm presenting like a mishmash of different ideas that the legislature has put into place. I think maybe a perspective I should provide is there is no one silver bullet solution to make housing affordable.
Right.
It's going to take a host of different things that reduce the cost of construction, make land infrastructure and development ready, right? Reduce the costs associated with like permitting timelines, reduce uncertainty, right, in the permitting process, things like that. That's necessary if the goal is to actually build more. So yeah, I mean, definitely take your point in. And I hopefully, I don't want to convey that any one of these laws is like the solution or the answer to housing, including middle housing, right? But, you know, it opens up new opportunities and ideas that can be helpful.
Okay.
All right.
We can go to the next one.
All right, let's move on then to, this is one that I wanted to just kind of key into a little bit, mostly because it's new, also because it's a little bit different from the others, but this is kind of one of the by right affordable statutes that has a nexus with state land. So obviously governments own land and they have disposition processes for kind of selling that land. A lot of those kind of really focus on kind of maximizing the amount of return. Right, I know DAS is a process that focuses on maximizing return to go into the common school fund, things like that. This bill, Home Start Lands, provides kind of a pathway to be able to use lands for affordable housing production. It provides kind of some provisions to make permitting easier for that. And it also provides an opportunity for local governments too, and a role for local governments to nominate land. So if a local government identifies some state-owned lands or has land that is owned by the local government that they really want to encourage using for affordable housing, this creates a program by which they can nominate that land to basically kind of be prioritized for use for affordable housing. You know, a local government has authority to like establish their own zoning regulations around that, things like that. And there's, you know, limitations and opportunities around that. It's just something worth considering. I figured I'd just highlight that as like a, you know, some of these laws are like, you know, super citing standards, but this one is an example of one that's a little bit more of like a, I guess, partnership where it makes sense. So I just wanted to point that one out. Yeah. All right, and then this is the one I wanted to focus on. This is also a big bundle of laws that gets at kind of what you were referring to, Roger, around, you know, we can call it middle housing, we can call it, you know, the missing middle X, Y, and Z. I mean, the short of what all of this bundle of laws does is allow people to build more homes on the same amount of land. So this includes what is statutorily defined as middle housing, which includes plexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. It includes things like accessory dwelling units. So if you wanted to add a unit, say, to your backyard to, you know, house, say, a family member or something like that, it gives you the ability to do that. As well as single room occupancy, which is more of like a niche housing type that used to exist a long time ago, where folks would share, say, like common facilities like kitchen, bathrooms, things like that. And the long and short of it, there's so much depth that we can talk about in all of these different bills. But the short of it is it's really focused on giving people more flexibility to build more homes on the same amount of land, right? To your point, the cost of land is very significant. And so if you are able to build more units on that same amount of land, even if they're smaller, you can oftentimes net a greater return by doing that. And of course, provide housing units that are actually cheaper on average. And I'll talk about that just in a little bit. I won't talk about like all of the details in here. A lot of this is spelled out. There's kind of a process happening right now for a lot of those nerdy laws I mentioned, administrative rules. But they get into a lot of the detail around kind of the siting and design of middle housing to ensure that it's, you know, kind of financially feasible to do this in a lot of different contexts. And there's other laws around kind of incentivizing different outcomes, like preserving the existing home on the site and adding middle housing to it, or encouraging home ownership by legalizing kind of these lot splits called middle housing land divisions that can enable home ownership of these different types of middle housing. And of course, there's just a whole host of things that we could talk about here, but I won't spend too much time going into all depth on that because I think that would be probably a presentation better suited for our colleagues who are working on this next process I'm going to be talking about, which is the housing choices rulemaking. Oh, and I forgot to mention on that last slide, one of the additional policies that passed to kind of tie this all together is what's called the Oregon Homes Law, which is just pre-approved plans by Building Codes Division. So Building Codes Division has a program now where they can review plans that are submitted by developers that they can kind of pre-certify, and that gives it some flexibility in the siting space in jurisdictions across the state. So that's a rule that's kind of underway right now. And that's what this process is. So a lot of these were passed at different times, but House Bill 2138 is a recent bill that kind of took all these laws, kind of evaluated, all right, how are we doing with this? How can we improve these laws? And how can we make them more conducive to providing housing options for folks? So what this bill did is it kind of amended a lot of the provisions to make them more flexible and to allow the citing of a lot of different options like detached middle housing or, a lot of like basically bonuses for different types of things that you might be providing. And part of this includes a direction to the Land Conservation and Development Commission, basically to reopen the books on the rules, to look at them, obviously implement all the new provisions in the law, and really to focus on ensuring that the siting of all these new housing options is made basically more feasible, more affordable, right, to be able to, for a developer to build them, and obviously affordable for people who are buying or renting them. And that's a process that's basically underway right now. It also includes kind of this direction to develop a statewide optional system development charge kind of model that they are working on, and they'll develop a report to the legislature kind of after this process in July 1st of 2028. This is just a brief timeline of this rulemaking process. It's kind of kicking off right now towards the end of 2026. I believe the first meeting's in October.
Yeah.
And from there, there's going to be a whole process underway. There's a rulemaking advisory committee of basically a lot of folks who really care about this topic, who are getting together and kind of providing feedback to the rulemaking team. They're going to be working on draft rules that I believe will be available in mid-2027, of course, up for adoption by LCDC towards the end of the year, where the law kind of stipulates that LCDC has this kind of deadline to adopt. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yes, just one follow-up. So these rules, we go back to the, sorry, could we go back to that last slide?
This one?
No, that next one. Okay. There we go. So, okay, so we're looking at just thinking about when Fairview would need to have these implemented, adopted into our code. By January 1st, 2028, we would need to either adopt by reference these rules or adopt them into our development code so that we are in compliance. Is that correct or?
So
Not quite.
this is where we have to talk about an interesting quirk in the legislation, which is the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, established two implementation deadlines for middle housing. It said for one of the deadlines, for most of the middle housing types, it established an implementation deadline of January 1st of 2027. And then for cottage clusters specifically, it established an implementation deadline of January 1st of 2028. Now, obviously, the rulemaking deadline is January 1st of 2028. So if you implement by January 1st of 2027, in a couple months from now, the rules will be adopted in the future and a city's code might not be conforming. So how do you address that? What happens is on that date, on either of those dates, if you pass that and a local government does not adopt conforming amendments, there is a model code, not the same one that we're going to talk about in a minute. This is a different statutory model code. That's the confusing part. I really didn't want to get into this. That does apply to development. And so what all cities kind of have in front of them is basically one of two options. One is they could try to just adopt conforming amendments before the statutory deadlines. And then after rulemaking concludes, they can do conforming amendments afterwards if they, say, for example, aren't interested in a model code applying. Or if they don't want to do two code amendments, they could simply just wait, allow the deadlines to pass. If an application comes through the door that uses a model code, they would apply for that case. And then they can just wait for the dust to settle on rulemaking. It's kind of the two options that are available. It's kind of a weird thing that's in the legislation that,
Yeah.
it's the legislature in their infinite wisdom, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Haven't you leave the, like, let's just say cottage cluster, like, just the jurisdictions that I'm involved with, say, City of Gresham, Fairview, City of Portland, there's not, it's not a clear and defined set of specifics. Each jurisdiction is allowed to implement their own design standards, how they want to see that put together, so much so that I've been involved in a project that we finally just said, that's it. We're not moving forward because it was this thing went on for over a year in trying to figure out exactly what the design standards needed to be for the city of Gresham. And it's not cost effective to move forward because the goalposts change constantly.
So one thing we'll talk about when we get to the next part of this presentation is how we can be a resource for that. Because one thing that we can do is we can kind of take a step back and look at the city's regulations and say, hey, there are actually rules that say what regulations you can apply to development, right? And sometimes they might be sanctioned under administrative rule, right? And that might be an answer to that question. But sometimes we often find like, oh, this is a thing that probably shouldn't do, like this is causing a lot of cost and delay to this particular development. And there's this problem here that might exist in this statute or might exist with this rule. And this is a problem that we can solve in partnership with the local government and with the developer. So one of the things I would encourage is if you're hitting a problem like that, like reach out to us. We can speak to a lot of these laws to, right, provide information about like what do the statutes and rules actually require of local governments as well.
And I think part of the problem with cottage clusters is that neighbors don't like it because there's very little, if any, off-street parking. I mean, I've seen these put into dead-end streets that there's just nothing for on-street parking because it's a neighborhood, an existing neighborhood with housing, and then they've got this cottage cluster of 4, 5, 6 houses or buildings within it with no on-street parking. Neighbors they hate them.
And why?
Well, they hate them because if you've got a residential house,
right? Why didn't you build more off-street parking?
It's not mine. I mean, I just watched it going up. I wasn't directly involved with that one. The other one that was.
But if you were building one, you'd build more off-street.
One in Gresham, we didn't even get to that place because it got so frustrating that we just decided to walk away. Just put it back on the market because it had been over a year. They put it back on the market and said they're done. Because there wasn't enough. Every time you try to get something passed or approved, then the goalpost changes. No, we don't like that. We want this.
There's actually a law that talks about goalposts.
But
we can be a resource.
Yeah. And some of these, I mean, I don't know, timing wise, some of these laws that have been put in place, such as what regulations apply at the time of your application, have been fairly recent to be put in place by the
Fairview
legislature, but
you haven't had anything come across Fairviews yet for cottage cluster, have you?
no, we have not had any proposals. Yeah,
Where would we put them?
But we've got one.
we do have a lovely one over by Salish Ponds. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
In regard to two things here. One, if I or any other citizen wanted to be able to find out of the litany of different agencies that have defined what affordable housing is, where would one go to find that? Is it going to reside in the administrative rules or the revised statutes, or do you have to go to each individual agency and hunt through it?
So the agencies don't decide what affordable housing is. The legislature does.
Okay.
For at least state laws. But then there's also the federal government, right? So for example, like HUD, they have their own definition of what affordable housing is specific that they use to their programs and funding sources. There's the low-income housing tax credit that has their own definition of what specifically affordable housing is for their financing purposes. And so a lot of these definitions sometimes align with each other. Sometimes they have differences with each other.
So if someone would want to be able to find out,
Basically, it's complex.
somewhere we did, I'm going to do to
Yeah.
Roger's point, it may have affordable housing and it's going to be defined on X amount of a percentage of standard.
Yeah, like
HUD still costs the same amount per square foot to build the building.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. So affordability, at least according to HUD's definition, is based on the price of the unit and what that household's ability to pay is, and it's generally a proportion of that person's or household's gross income. But normally, I don't know of any governments that base the affordability on like the size of the unit. Some do have like methodologies that kind of adjust income limits based on the number of bedrooms, expecting a larger household, which would have a higher income threshold, but it's complicated, and it really depends what you're talking about.
I think it's intentionally complicated.
Yeah, it's mostly just like lots of different legislators having different ideas about what they want to support with affordable housing. Of course, that gets sent down to the implementation level, and it's like now we have a lot of different competing.
The second question is, with all the changes in the legislature, to be able to develop middle housing, accessory dwelling units, anything that's going to be able to increase the housing availability, how is that interface with existing planned communities that have CCNRs that specifically define what is going to be allowed in that development?
So this bill has a couple of provisions. So again, remember, this is the legislature deciding this. One is that one of the changes that happened in this bill was to allow middle housing on each lot or parcel that allows for detached single unit dwellings. So what that means is there's a lot, you allow a detached home on it, any of the housing types, basically as they're able to kind of fit within the siting and design parameters of that local government's development code, consistent with administrative rules, would be allowed. And also this bill has a provision around restrictive codes, covenants, and restrictions that basically renders them unenforceable. So if there is an existing CCNR that prohibits, say, the building of an ADU or the building of middle housing, that is not an enforceable provision under the law, at least according to this bill.
Lastly, one last question. This movement toward increasing housing availability and affordability, how well has that been working so far?
Yeah, so there is a new kind of, and this is part of the Goal 10 program, part of the reason why I recommend bringing, somebody from the housing division. So one of the things that happened in 2023 is, we were asking the question of housing production, affordability, and choice. And one of the things that was very clear is we don't actually measure it. We don't measure how many homes are built. We don't have any kind of tracking of this.
How do we know if we're successful?
Right. And so in 2023, one of the bills that passed was saying we should do that. We should establish kind of goals, right, that housing production targets. And the point of these targets is not to try to hit them, or like if you don't hit them, bad things happen, but rather that we actually start systematically tracking, all right, how many homes are we building? Are we making progress towards our goals? And then if not, what can we do to basically course correct? That is something that's actually brand new. It's basically kind of 2 years old at this point. We're just starting to gather some data from different cities, and not all cities participate. It's only cities above 10,000 in population that kind of participate in that broader program. But that's kind of like, it's our first look. So it's like we only have a small subset of time that we're actually looking at. And of course, 2023, that's when interest rates kind of took a shot up. So we haven't been producing as much housing in recent years. So I think really in the long term is we just started measuring, but in the near term, obviously we're in a down part of the market where building's pretty expensive.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to share with you, there is a website that has a dashboard where reporting from cities on housing production gets posted. So cities have to report it each year to Portland State, which gathers this data up. And again, it's fairly recent, but it is providing a mechanism for, public consumption to see what things are looking like. And that's also going to be tied to the city's project that will be starting in 2027 to do our housing capacity analysis to see, evaluate the land that we have in Fairview, where we can accommodate housing, how much and what kind, at what price points, and then develop a strategy to kind of address those targets. So, yeah, lots more to come on that.
Stay tuned.
Next couple of years, yeah.
Yeah. So I can move into this next part of the presentation. I did actually have a personal anecdote that I was kind of wanting to share. Maybe
Yeah.
should I
Yeah,
take some
yeah,
time?
go for it.
Because I think it's, all right. I think sometimes when we think of these laws, like we think about them in the abstract, right? And a lot of them are very new. They haven't had time really to be implemented. We don't know what's going to happen, right? We have to predict the future, and obviously none of us can predict the future. Some of these laws have been around for at least a couple of years now. And so we're starting to see, like, do these actually kind of have outcomes that are beneficial or tangible, at least, that like kind of take it away from just being this abstraction of like, what's middle housing? Does anybody even want this stuff? To like somebody who's actually been affected by this law. And I am actually a beneficiary of this law because it enabled a new option in my neighborhood. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, not saying like, and I'll caveat right at the top of this, what you see on the screen right here, this is actually my house next to my neighbor's
I was
house.
going to ask that.
Yeah, obviously personal
Amazing.
information removed, but I'm not showing this to say like, oh, this is great and everybody should have this, or like X, Y, and Z. Like this would actually not be legal to build in Fairview for a lot of reasons.
Well, where I come from, that's a shotgun house.
Yeah, and actually, specifically that house on the right there is actually 3 homes.
Wow.
And there's like a middle unit, there's a front unit, middle unit, back unit. And basically the way that this particular site worked in my neighborhood, I lived a street like over renting a place. And in the pandemic era, that home on the left, that detached house was built kind of before middle housing was legalized. And it's, pretty comparable to other homes in the area that are new, tend to be around like $600,000-700,000. Great option for my neighbor who's a Mets fan. I won't hold that against her. But one of the things that happened, that lot on the right was kind of just sitting vacant for a while. And eventually a developer, who mostly works out of Vancouver, chose to build a triplex here. And technically the building codes regulates them as townhouses, but it's just 3 units on a lot. It's a pretty skinny lot too. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to just kind of provide is just like maybe an illustration is like when we talk about housing, housing's always kind of a bundle of trade-offs, right? Like you're always choosing between like location and the size of the unit that you live in and like how much maintenance you're going to have for the unit. If you have a really old house, right, as you're dealing with right now, that's like, you're always dealing with these trade-offs that you have, and you always choose these different bundles of trade-offs. And one of the things that's been at least good in my neighborhood is there have been a lot more new trade-offs coming online of like, hey, you're going to be sharing this lot with your neighbors and you'll be sharing a wall, you'll have a much smaller place. But in exchange, these units are like $400,000 cheaper. So like my unit, I purchased at kind of asking price for about $290,000, was able to get closing costs, as a concession. But my neighbors actually got discounts because they sat on the market for a while because, they just did. And I think one of the things that was at least great for me is that like by opening up this new bundle of trade-offs, like, yes, I have to choose like I'm choosing a smaller unit, I'm choosing to share a wall with my neighbors. But the reality is, if this option didn't exist, I wouldn't be a homeowner, because even the oldest homes in my neighborhood that are like tiny and have a lot of maintenance problems start at like $400,000, which I just can't really do. So I just wanted to kind of convey this, not saying like, again, that this is something that needs to be everywhere, but it's something that really opened up an option for me personally. And I think is opening up options for a lot of folks too. So it's just something I wanted to convey is like, we've seen a little bit of progress so far. I'm not saying that this is, indicative that the problems are solved, but it's just something I wanted to share.
The problem here in Fairview is we're not making any more land.
Yeah. Yeah, the only people who make land are God and the Dutch.
And
China does an okay job too.
I guess, yeah, they're newcomers.
Yeah, so these small infill units, for example, maybe the opportunity to take a lot where there's an existing house and create a new middle housing lot out of it by adding more units, something that, again, I think slowly over time, we adopted the state put in place the middle housing rules, 5 years ago now? Like, what year is it?
Oh, yeah.
And we followed the model code. We adopted our local code in 2023, and we have not seen an explosion of middle housing development. I mean, there's a lot that has to do with the market, the cost of construction, just how much is getting built, period, which is not a lot right now. But I think that was kind of what I anticipated, is that it would happen slowly over time. So it will be interesting to see, like, 10 years into the future, how many of, these types of housing units have been added here and there around Fairview. We've really seen one site develop with middle housing at this point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, I mean, I can move on to talking through some of the tools. I just wanted to kind of, humanize it, I guess, a little bit rather than just talking about it in the abstract.
Yeah, great.
All right, well, why don't we go to talking through some of the tools that we're providing to basically be a resource. And one of the things I wanted to add to is our office also kind of represents like a new kind of focus in DLCD. Sometimes, folks, like DLCD has been, where the Department of Land Conservation and Development, those two goals can be in tension with each other. For a long time, folks saw us really as folks who were primarily focused on the conservation side of things. But one thing we've really been leaning into, especially in recent years, is on the development side of things. So a big thing that we have been really kind of tapping into is actually connecting with and talking to developers, specifically to understand a lot of the problems and challenges they face in the construction process. So I wanted to speak to some of the tools that we provide, for both parties, to basically help kind of assist in facilitating production. And where we think we can kind of best do that is around this gap that exists where, if you talk to the legislature or, folks who participate in the legislative process, you would think that the problem is solved when a bill gets adopted. And that is very far from true, because obviously the folks who actually build the housing on the ground, it's the producers, and the folks who implement the laws on the ground are the cities and counties, right? And if you don't think about how you get from the actual legislation to the implementation and production, that bill's not going to do anything. And that's happened for a number of bills that exist. And really where we see kind of our role being helpful for this is providing those tools and resources to address that particular gap right there. Now, one way that we try to do this is by basically kind of just being an open resource for folks to be able to reach out to us. We call this inquiries and complaints, but the way you could think about this is as kind of informal kind of questions and problem solving versus kind of a more formal process that is maybe less often used, but still an option and can be useful in certain cases. So inquiries basically are just like, hey, ask us a question, show us a problem that you're dealing with. Let's talk through, like, are there options that can help your project move forward? Or if you're a local government, you're trying to do code work, what does this housing law have to say about X, Y, and Z? How does this code provision look like, X, Y, and like we answer a lot of different questions just on a very regular basis. And that's something that we just provide. It's open to the public. You can always reach out to us. We've got obviously links here. And we get lots of questions from developers and local governments just about different problems they're facing, right? We do also have a more formal process around what are called complaints or allegations of housing law violations. This is basically if there's, let's say, a development project and a developer, maybe thinks that, a standard might not be clear and objective or something like that, and it's creating a problem. We have a formal process in which they can allege a housing law violation. We go through this process to determine, well, is there one that's happening here? And ideally, is there a way that we can solve this problem before we need to do any kind of like escalation? I won't go into the details on that, but it's kind of a new resource, and we've actually been working a lot more with developers in recent years than I have ever had in DLCD previously, and have been getting a lot of perspective on like what problems can really rise up in the development process. And sometimes there are things that we can often help out with. Sometimes we're learning about new things that are like, oh man, public facilities is a real big sticky problem that like there's no laws about,
But you have to rely on what the cities do, so you don't step on their toes.
Yeah.
Right, so if somebody calls you with a question that's going to get into the weeds for our municipal code,
Yes.
you've got to do your work. To tell them, well, Fairview says it's this.
Yeah, and so we have processes of like how we undergo, like how we handle each of these. So like if we're responding to a question about a development project, we typically try to make sure both parties are informed, right? So that way we're being transparent of like, hey, here's what we have to say in terms of our guidance. We want to make sure everybody's apprised so there's no like surprises or lack of transparency. Similarly, in the complaint process, there's kind of a fact-finding period of like, hey, there's been this allegation, we would like to learn more information about what's going on the ground, so that way we can inform our review, that type of thing. So we have all these procedures that are kind of built in there to ensure that it's kind of transparent, right, as we work with both parties.
I'm trying to be polite and say, don't step on our toes.
Thanks, Rob.
So another resource that we provide is around, so I mentioned, I won't spend as much time on this one just because this is not something I work on a day-to-day basis. But we also, as part of our mighty team of 7, we have 2 navigators. And basically their whole job is around all of the other state agencies that touch the permitting process. So like if there are problems that relate to, say, an ODOT facility or DEQ wastewater permitting or wetlands or things like that, our navigators are basically able to help folks navigate those processes, understand what the applicable requirements are, be able to meet with folks, right? Especially if kind of timelines are dragging on, things like that. They can really assist kind of, help address log jams and those processes that can often arise and are really difficult to navigate, like 6 different agencies if you're, say, just working on one project. As part of that, they also developed this kind of database of state resources that relate to housing that's kind of just available to anybody on our website. We call this our Housing Resource Hub. They're definitely kind of a new resource. Like the idea that state agencies should be working in coordination to support production is kind of a novel idea, surprisingly. So, there's a lot to be learned here, but it's something I just wanted to highlight. Another thing that we're working on, we understand that a lot of these laws are pretty arcane, right? And not a lot of folks know about them. So we're really trying to make it easier to understand like which laws we administer and how they kind of intersect with development, things like that. So one of that includes providing this new tool, our Housing Law Library, which is really just intended to kind of give folks like an overview of the most common ones that we get inquiries on, and to provide like common questions that we often respond to. That's something that's kind of a recently launched resource, just launched in the last couple of weeks. And we're going to be building on it in the coming weeks with new laws as we kind of work and carefully vet a lot of the materials that we want to publish.
So you could click on, if you had a question about mandatory adjustments, you could click there and thered be some like Q&A based on.
Yeah, basically a frequently asked questions
Mm-hmm.
section. There's also a summary of the law, that kind of thing. It links to any resources we might have, links to any relevant bills, or like links to the law where it's kind of cited, things like that. Just as a way of like being like, all right, here's everything we know about this thing.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so new fun resource. And then finally, I think one of the ones that we kind of hinted at throughout this, and this is the other model code I was talking about. And this one is kind of more of an optional resource that we intend to lean into more. So obviously the legislature's been legislating a lot in the last decade or so. They show no signs of stopping. And we know that can be really difficult, especially for a local practitioner, to be able to keep up with, right? Because if you have a new law, now you have to codify it, right? That's a new process that you have to do. And so something that we're really leaning into are what are called model codes and ordinances that we adopt specifically to implement housing laws. We first implemented these codes in response to legislative direction in 2025 to establish kind of streamlined processes and standards for different housing types. But after we kind of did that, now we're kind of leaning into the space of, hey, there's all these different housing laws that the legislature's adopted in the past. What if we provided kind of modules that really provide an implementation tool for a local government that they can take off the shelf? There's kind of different ways they can use it. Obviously, if a city's pursuing their own code amendments, they can use it as guidance, hopefully address kind of, interpretive situations that might be kind of tricky or not well spelled out in the law. They have the ability, if they say, for example, don't want to be kind of on the hamster wheel of code amendments, they have the option to adopt things by reference. That lets them say, hey, you see the Middle Housing Land Division law, that's great. We're just going to adopt the state's model code just by reference, so that way we don't have to worry about it, updates in the future. And then there's also an option, if they haven't adopted code amendments yet, but the law still applies, where they can optionally apply it directly to comply with the law. It's an option that this new code provides. And so, we're really hoping to build on this as kind of both an optional resource and kind of as a tool to help facilitate that compliance part of housing laws to ideally make local government's jobs a little bit easier, right? Navigating all these different laws that the legislature's passed. So that's just something I wanted to also kind of chime in and provide there. Did you have questions about timeline?
So there's currently sort of an update to the model code that's out for public review right now.
Yeah.
There's the next one, yeah. And so I think as we're thinking about code updates moving forward, some of this is related to timing, and I think there may be, we'll talk in our kind of discussion after Sean's done with this presentation about code amendment package and timing. But I think one of the questions I have is just sort of like this general approach to using the model code, which is something that we need to think about. So for example, we adopted a new floodplain ordinance to comply with the PICM,
The FEMA.
right? Recently, and because, this way, with the new model ordinance, all the updates that will be made by FEMA in the future, hopefully, will be based off of the model ordinance, and it'll be really clear what changes, and we don't have to kind of integrate that into our unique floodplain code. This package of code amendments is, I would say, more extensive than just, maybe what lived in our floodplain code, and may differ a little bit more from our existing regulations for housing. But as you said, the legislature is going to keep adopting new amendments. There will be, additional rulemaking processes. And so, sort of, we need to think about what makes the most sense and what's the easiest. I think from a public perspective and a developer perspective, it seems like it would definitely be the easiest thing to have the code, the model ordinance, if we were going to borrow that in Fairview's code directly, instead of, adopting it by reference and needing to go and find something, in a different location. I mean, that's just kind of, maybe my perspective, as long as folks know that this is the same model code that we might see in a different community. So I guess that's kind of what, one pro for adopting the model code. Then every time the Department of Land Conservation and Development has an update to the model code, it'll be clearly redlined. We would adopt the same thing. On the other hand, going through and comparing our existing code to the model code in terms of considering updates, maybe a larger process, right? Like deciding, do we want to just borrow certain elements of the state model code and pull that into our code? Do we want to really just, go through our existing code, try and make all of our compliance updates? And if we have questions about how to interpret things, we can look to the model code and kind of like borrow language here and there. So I feel like there's kind of a lot of different ways that we could use it. And I'm just curious, maybe more like, what you've been hearing from other jurisdictions, how other people have been using it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'd probably emphasize is none of this is an all or nothing, right? Because we specifically designed this to be modular, like, you don't have to choose to adopt the whole thing in order to, if you just want one module that implements a specific law and that's it. And so there's different kind of like, some are more suited, like maybe code amendments do make sense if you have the time and resources to dedicate to it. I think a great example here actually is final engineering review, because that one actually technically isn't a housing law because of a quirk of how it was codified. I won't get into that.
And is definitely something that we don't have in our existing code.
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of something brand new.
Even as we were working on the module, we were like, oh, wow, this probably would benefit a lot from a local government looking at this and being like, all right, how are we going to coordinate with like our service providers, right? Like things like that. And so, that would be probably an example of considering like, we should probably think about just adopting our own conforming amendments if we have the resources. But then there's other ones that are probably best suited for not adopting code amendments, say like residential design standards, right? Because it's just a small provision of law. There, the module provides kind of some basically like basic processes of like, how do you know whether a standard is a residential design standard? How do you count to 20? Things like that. Surprisingly complex question, but like that would be a great example of one that's like, well, it's probably not really worth the resources because this is just a temporary law. We wouldn't need to codify any amendments, and you don't even need to adopt it by reference. You could apply it directly if an application's like, hey, you got residential design standards here, and we're not interested in those.
Yeah. And
So
I think
they're all options, yeah.
Right. And I think we are taking that approach where if there's a temporary law, I do not think that it's worth it to update our code if it's just going to be in place. Of course, it could be extended, but for now, if it's just going to be in place for 5 years, we can just reference, what the law says.
But we've seen a lot of uptick, or we're starting to see a lot of uptick, right? I wouldn't say, like, with all of these are all drafts, right? So they're not going to be official until early 2027 when they're adopted by LCDC. But for our existing codes, we started to see uptake of some of the laws that are a little bit more cut and dry, like middle housing land divisions. It's pretty baked how you do a middle housing land division in the statute. And so a lot of cities, especially ones that are like smaller and they're like, we don't see any of these. That's a common use case of like taking the middle housing land division statute and adopting it by reference or applying it directly, things like that. So we've seen more uptake of it in that way. And we expect once we adopt these new housing law modules, we'll see a lot more use cases like that of really just kind of meeting cities where they're at in terms of their capacity. And of course, I'll add, these are also tools for developers too, right? Like if there is, say, like a developer who is interested in taking advantage of, say, the procedural provisions of the expedited rezone PUD and variance law, right? They have a module that's available that they can lean on as like this is a way of implementing this law, right? That they can then bring to the local government and say, hey, I'd like to do something like this. How do we make this happen? Yeah, so it's really a resource for both, but obviously, first and foremost, local governments are the implementers of the code, so,
Sure.
yeah.
Anyway, you may have
That's a
more,
lot,
you
yeah,
may have
that's a lot
more,
of
you may have more to say
information.
on this topic that wasn't related to my question, but.
No, I mean, they're out for public comment right now. We're really just focusing on like taking this law and giving a code that like just implements that law. We're not like trying to address broader policy questions, but if you have laws of interest that you're like, wow, how do you implement this type of thing? Please feel free to send us comments. We're open to thinking about it. What we can't do is we can't change what the legislature adopted. That's the one thing we can't do. I will take those.
But we can ignore what the legislature says.
Oh, my goodness.
I will say my job is to ensure the effective implementation of ordinance housing laws.
I come from the federal sector.
Yeah.
Any other?
Yeah. Understand. Yes, well, I will definitely be looking at this information at the draft that's out, as we're looking at doing our code updates.
Don't hesitate to submit public comment. We want to make sure these are a useful resource for folks. We want to make sure we're answering any ambiguities that are in the law, things you've been thinking about, we want to know. And I think that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned that there's often a lot of questions that happen at the end, or
I don't know.
Kind of threw them out there all in between.
Yeah, I mean,
topic.
we've had a few from the peanut gallery over
I
there.
have one.
yeah, sure.
I am not a homeowner. So a lot of this information is, I'm trying to absorb all of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Roger's point, you're a developer, correct?
Builder.
Builder, okay. In order for a builder to build something, they gotta have the land, right? Well, my point is, land costs money. How do they appraise the cost of the land?
Who's they?
Builders?
Well, I mean, when someone's gonna buy the land, how is that land,
Value.
How's the,
how is it valued?
the sales price determined?
Yeah, how is that determined?
Yeah, this is actually a complex question. So land, it's like, kind of like housing, it's like a bundle of trade-offs, right? So if you are thinking about purchasing land, especially as a developer, you're thinking a lot about, like, is this land, for example, in a development-ready state? Is it near infrastructure? Is it near places where people want to be? Is it zoned to allow the thing I want to build? What's the regulatory environment like? Like, you're thinking about a lot of different factors that go into, like, will you be able to make a project work on a particular piece of land? And because of that, where that land exists, how far along, like, is it served by infrastructure? Is it divided to be able to, like, be kind of permit ready through a subdivision process? All of those things matter a lot in terms of what the actual price of land is. Oftentimes when builders talk about the price of land, they're talking about it in the cost of finished lots. So if we're thinking about like land that is, farmland that is kind of way outside of city limits, that's going to be something that's not very valuable. It's not actually really relevant to home building because you can't really build anything on it. But if we're talking about like, say, land that a developer's like interested in building on, you're normally talking about like, all right, well, what was the cost when you consider how much it costs to take the raw land, to get everything necessary to get that, subdivided, platted, such that I can go in and submit a building permit and build whatever I was intending to build on this. That's often how they talk about it in terms of cost of a finished lot. And a lot goes into that. Obviously, location is one of them.
Location is everything.
Yeah, I mean, how much did it cost to serve the land, right? Like, was it very expensive? Were there a lot of regulatory fees associated with getting this land development ready? Were there a lot of exactions? Say, for example, maybe on the annexation, you had to dedicate a bunch of land for like right-of-way or parkland. All of that goes into the final price of the land. It's very complex in terms of like how land is valued. I don't know, Roger, if you wanted to add additional,
Oh, it's exactly all of that and then some. But the problem is that when you have somebody who's trying to sell it, then you have to ask for the due diligence period that's involved in that, and that costs money.
Yep.
Because they're not going to let you do it, so you have to pay for that. And then that time period has a limit to it. Somebody's not going to let you go a year and a half or 2 years, which it would actually take to actually discover all of the different things that he's talking about. Because those things that he's talking about sometimes take a year,
Sure.
year and a half to find. And even then, after you've done your due diligence, you go into the process, and then Sarah comes along and says, no, you can't do that. We're not going to allow that.
Or, I mean, and
The state could say, it could be a part of the state's design, but in the jurisdiction of Fairview, we say, no, we don't want that.
Yeah.
We're not going to allow that.
So there's a lot more to it than just buying the land. There's a lot of work that has to go into it.
a lot of work. It's a really good question, yeah.
And for me, as not a homeowner, I have no freaking clue. So,
I mean,
but thank you for,
When is that affordable housing from their side of the table is only referring to, and I'm sorry, but this is exactly the way I feel, that it only refers to the end use.
Sure.
Not the person producing, because there's nothing that I feel like, even in the help that's there, would help me to make it affordable to build, whether it's the development or the production of a house that is there so far. I can tell you stories that would be the antithesis or the opposite of exactly what you said about your experience, because we have 9 attached houses that aren't selling because of middle housing, because there's such a glut of this.
Yeah, that's actually,
Limitation, that the problem is that the people who would buy those don't want to buy them, because they
kind of
in their mind, it's like, I can rent.
Yeah, met.
I can rent for the same price I'm going to buy, and I don't have to do anything. I don't have to maintain anything.
Yeah,
I don't have to own a home.
That is, that's actually one of the things that happened. This is a Portland market kind of specific thing, where once housing, like attached housing configurations were legalized, a lot of developers kind of built a huge amount of attached, like mostly townhomes.
National is.
Yeah. And the kind of one of the outcomes of that is, so they built a little bit too much. And so there was, some demand for it at first. Obviously, there was kind of a pretty steep discount in comparison to buying, a detached house. But eventually, right, a lot of homes started sitting on the market. I think we're kind of in a market now where even detached homes are sitting on the market for a long time now too. And so it's just, like the buying market is pretty bad right now. But as a consequence, right, a lot of builders who kind of took a risk on this, now they're sitting on homes that they're struggling to sell, right? And that's a cost, right, that gets borne out.
I'm sitting on home.
No, totally understand. So like, and, I guess I'll just add, like, I think some of the tools that I talked about here are definitely really geared towards affordable housing specifically, right? Like, as that's defined in 10 million ways. But a lot of the tools too, and I think this is something I'd really just encourage, like reaching out to us when you have a problem. Increasingly, there's a recognition at the legislature that like housing production is not just affordable. It's all kinds of production, and really reducing the costs associated with development is an important thing to do on either side of the ledger, And so I think as like different tools come online, or as you find different problems, that's actually really important for us to be able to hear, to see if we have ways to address it. And then if we don't, to know that, so we can convey up to decision makers like, hey, turns out, for example, infrastructure availability is a humongous problem that there aren't really laws about, right? That's like a very common thing that we run into as an example. But I think the only way that we're going to learn that is through connecting with the people who implement on the ground, cities, counties, and housing producers, such as yourself. And renters too, I'd say, yeah.
For answering that question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, no, these are all great questions. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you very much for being here. I might have some follow-up questions for you.
I
and
would expect nothing less.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, as well as for the housing division side with rulemaking, yeah, as we're moving forward. So, yeah, we'll definitely continue to stay in touch.
Great, awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Sean.
thank you all so much.
Yeah,
Take care.
yeah, thanks again for being
Get
here.
home in the light, maybe.
Oh, yeah,
We can't tell, I had to close the curtains because of the sun.
Oh, man.
Well, I guess you can see just barely.
Right, take care.
Okay, you
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
How involved is code maintenance amendment package?
it's not,
Okay,
okay,
cool, so moving on.
yes, okay, so.
8:06 already.
Okay, so
That was a lot.
we are going to, I'm just gonna bring up a Word document here that I have on the screen to go over. Okay. Okay, this, here we go. Okay, I better share this.
In a minute.
Okay, so this isn't very interesting looking, but here we go. So I'm gonna make this actually a little smaller if I can, usually. Okay. Oh, I need to do my new quick share. Yeah. Okay, so I kind of just wanted to go over what I'm thinking in terms of our upcoming code maintenance. We have not done sort of an overall kind of code maintenance update for quite a while. The last major bundle of code amendments came when we did the middle housing code update, which was adopted in 2023. So we tried at that time to just address some kind of low-hanging fruit, some minor things that needed to get fixed. And as we've done other code amendments, for example, when we updated the town center commercial code, or when we updated the parking code, we tried to kind of address just some miscellaneous things at that time. But we've now accumulated like 20 or so items so far of things that fall mostly in the like code errors, where there's maybe like a reference to something in the code, a section of the code that no longer exists, or there's an inconsistency between two standards that makes it confusing. Or it's.
Editorial.
Yeah, kind of like those would be, the code errors are kind of like the minor cleanup. Or for example, when we adopted our middle housing code amendments, we found that like accidentally, there were a couple things that like got deleted through the track changes. So we want to make sure that we just do some cleanup. And for those things, we've been applying the state rules. Then there are some things where we just have identified certain provisions in the code where we feel changes would be beneficial in terms of development. Examples include what is the surface, the ground surface that's required for like a parking lot. There's discretion. It's caused some confusion and difficulty, and we want to make sure that we can have really clear answers. We've had a lot of questions coming up around canopies, metal canopies that people use to cover their RVs or their boats in their yard, and where they can place them on their lot. And are they considered accessory structures? And when are they temporary and when are they permanent structures? So clarifying some things, I think would help improve our ability to implement the code and provide more clarity for homeowners. Those are just a couple of examples. And then there's this category of code organization. So in our development code, There are 3 what are called articles. Is that what it's called? Yes. The first one is kind of introductory provisions and the definitions. The next one is all of the zoning districts. So you have all the standards that are specific to like the residential zones and the town center commercial zone and the general industrial zone and all the different village zones. Then there's a next set of standards that's called design standards. But these aren't really all design standards. It's kind of a mishmash of different types of development regulations. And then we have kind of the procedural section. It describes like, what is a type 2 site design review application? And what's a type 3 site design review application? And how do you review changes to the zoning code? What's the criteria for changing the code or changing the zoning? And we, as implementers of the code, there are just certain things where things aren't located in the right spot, or there are standards that address the same thing. Like there are standards related to amending the zoning code and amending the zoning map that live in 2 totally different articles of the code. And it would just make sense to put them together in the right article. So we've kind of, so far, there's about 20 or so different topics on the list that fall within those code errors, improved development outcomes, and code organization section. And then there is this number 1, compliance with state law. And as we heard from Sean, there's a lot. Some of these things we can move forward with implementing now. Because they're not necessarily going through a process where the state is developing detailed Oregon administrative rules, and they're not being covered by model ordinances. There are other state laws where there's a state process still going on, and I think it makes sense for us to wait until that's completed. So what I've been just trying to do is go through this long list of House and Senate bills and the different provisions in them and determine which things we should incorporate into like this first round of code amendments, because they're pretty straightforward, or we're not waiting on the state for anything else. And then what we might want to wait and process a separate batch of like housing law compliance code amendments for sometime maybe next year, the year after that. And in the meantime, we would just, when these things came up, we would just directly apply the state legislation. But there will be some of the compliance with state law items that will fold into this code maintenance package. So what we're kind of thinking in terms of timeline in process, we are right here, right now, August. So this is just kind of introducing the project, talking a little bit about the scope. Next month, end of September, we're thinking that we could come back with more information on how we're going to divvy up complying with the state rule, whether we'll do it as part of this first batch of code maintenance amendments or focus on that later when we have more guidance from the state. And then we can share our list on the non-state housing items. So we can kind of go through that list, talk about how we're thinking to resolve those items. And then something we haven't done before in Fairview, but I have participated in elsewhere, is to just let the community know that we're going to be doing these code maintenance amendments and provide an opportunity if members of the community have something that they want to suggest or any feedback on the list that staff has come up with. So the next edition of the Fairview Point newsletter is going to come out the beginning of October. That's a great time to be able to advertise this opportunity. So we were thinking you're meeting on the 4th Tuesday in October. We could have a work session and we could open it up. And if anybody comes from the public, they could provide their feedback to the commission. And then looking ahead toward this winter, we looked at the schedule for November and December, and your fourth meeting, or the fourth Tuesday of the month in November is Thanksgiving week. The fourth Tuesday in December is the week of Christmas. So we're proposing to kind of consolidate those, which we've done before, I believe, and instead of meeting those dates in November and December, meet the second Tuesday in December if people would be available. And at that time, we would have a draft of all the code amendments to review for a work session, and then in January, have a public hearing. And then just a caveat at the bottom, if we do get a land use application that's coming in that needs to come before you for a public hearing, we are anticipating one, not quite sure about the timing, but it's a larger project, so we would like to just dedicate your meeting to a public hearing for that. So we might have to shift things around a little bit, but that's kind of what we're proposing at this time. So any feedback on that?
No, sounds like a plan.
Yeah?
You guys have the time to do that? I mean, are you kind of in a, I mean, for a while there, your stack of papers was pretty high, you guys.
Yeah, well, I think
you in a lull now?
because we're not seeing a lot of development activity right now.
Okay.
Both with land use applications and on the permitting side. Again, this Fairview Springs project, which we've talked about before, that's been in kind of the pre-app stage for a while on Halsey Street between like the Fork and the Ukrainian Bible Church. If that comes in, that's going to be a big development review project that we will be working through. But these buckets that fall under code errors in minor development related items and code organization are pretty straightforward. So I don't think it'll take a whole lot of our time. The housing piece is what might take longer. So if we don't have to implement a lot of that with this first batch, if we're kind of waiting on the state to come out with their guidance, then I think it shouldn't be a huge lift.
Did you get that extra person in your department?
No.
Did the bill get authorized, or just not been advertised, or not hired?
We will be hiring an economic development specialist.
Yeah.
But we don't have them yet. So it's in process.
Oh, it's an HR thing.
Yeah, it's next up in the recruitment list, you know. I think when personnel leave and we have to backfill, then that takes first priority. Yeah. So.
I've been happening a lot.
All right, well, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it seems like it sounds like a good approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we can make them bite-sized, that'd be great.
Yep, okay, perfect. Sounds good. Well, we will be back with more on this topic in September.
Okay, so
Sounds like a winner.
that's the tentative agenda, right?
That's a tentative agenda, exactly.
Okay. Do we have any updates?
I do have a question on I suspect that commission and staff updates. I got this today from the state,
Okay,
and it's Oregon Government Ethics Commission,
okay,
dated today. And it says that because of the fact that three criterion, you recently accepted a position as an employee at a public body, that's not us. You are serving on a public board, commission, or council.
yes.
That is us. And it says that we have to take this training. It's a 90-minute class.
Oh, interesting.
Did it
And,
say we have to, or are we?
well, it says,
Because I got that.
Oregon Government Ethics Commission announces an update and improved ethics law training. The Oregon Government Ethics Commission recently adopted the Government Ethics Law Guide as a resource for public officials. This updated training reflects the information presented in the Government Ethics Law Guide. You might be looking for ethics law training because, and then that's when it went through.
Okay, I will double check with our city recorder. She would know the answer to this. It seems like it's optional and not necessarily required, but I will say we had somebody come in from the,
Last
Few
year.
months ago.
right, Did you attend that? Sorry, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I will check with Devery and get back to you on that. If it's a requirement for some reason, because things have changed.
And I know too, here in September or October, we'll get that notice again where we have to fill out the conflict of interest questionnaire.
Right. That's annual.
They sent it to the wrong email address and they called me and said, you're out of compliance.
Yeah, I filled that thing out in like April or May.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the fact that they changed our email addresses to our regular ones from the
Right.
city ones.
Right.
I see. Okay, okay.
So we were way late on it and, which was no big deal. The young lady I talked to was really, really nice about it. And she said, well, we can do it right now if you've got the time. And I said, let's go for it.
Yeah, okay. Will you forward that email to me, just so I have it? Okay, perfect.
Any other updates?
No, I don't think we have any staff updates this evening.
Okay, excellent. Do I hear a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second?
It's
to
gone.
adjourn?
You should get it.
Okay.
All right. All in favor of adjournment?